It's about time I started talking about this one, huh? Hey guys, what's up? Yeah, I know. I'll probably do another video specifically on why it's taking so freaking long to do videos. But I just wanted to get right into doing this one because I really need to get back to putting out videos regularly, and this one's been a very long time coming, and even though it's not going to be presented exactly the way that I really wanted to do it, I'm at least going to put it out. I'm hoping at some point I'll at least be able to really show off what it can do, but for now, let's consider this to be a good overview on what we're about to talk about. And that is this beauty. The Scott Rodell cutting Jian. Now, I've had this sword for a while. You guys who've been watching this channel know that I've had this for a while. I made a very brief preview of it, said I was going to test it, and I did test it somewhat, and I wasn't able to get the footage I really wanted to get, and by the time I was able to get the footage I really wanted to get, well, things happened, and now I'm in a situation where I can't find a location to do it. But I did test this and use this long enough to have a really good impression of what it's capable of, how well it holds up to training, practice, cutting, and just if it's an overall good value or not. So, let's get into it. Now, if you've already seen this channel, if you already saw the preview video, you already know what the features and, should we say, the stats of this sword is. But let's just get into it. Let's first of all, the cutting Jian itself, why it exists. The basic reason why this particular sword was put out to market a long time ago, I forgot how many years it was, but at the time when this sword first came out, there really weren't any affordable Jian for Chinese martial artists who also wanted to do test cutting with. Usually if you were practicing Chinese martial arts and you were training in Jian forms or styles and so on, you either had to work with something that was good for training but wasn't what you would call a real sword. That it didn't really have a good cutting edge, it wasn't made for the rigors of combat, it couldn't really stand up to the shock of hitting another object, and you know, it was pretty much a wall hanger that was well balanced. Well, that's really insulting it. Some of them were basically well made as far as the balance of the weight goes, but they weren't exactly what you'd want to use for combat. If you did have a sword that had a proper edge and was made, you know, with higher standards, like probably higher quality fittings, woods, etc., they tended to be really expensive, and even those swords weren't necessarily able to handle cutting through targets, or at least, you know, the rigors of cutting the same way a katana would. Like this is like late 90s, early 2000s, like around that era. You really couldn't find anything like, the market was nothing like the way it is now. And Scott Rodell was one of the few people who still did training, like trying to cut through test targets, but he was using antiques, and he was getting requests and, you know, questions from people who wanted to like have something that could actually cut through targets. He actually put out a video on his own channel where he talks about the making of this sword, and rather than just go through the whole thing myself, I humbly, you know, advise that you guys go and check that channel out and check the video out. It's not that long, and it's a pretty good overview of what he went through making this, what went into making it, as well as it might give you even a little bit of insight on some of the things that people consider when making a sword to go to market. So definitely check that video out. I'll have the link in the description. But to just quickly go over it, after testing many different models and having to find the right balance between being able to have a blade that can cut through hard and soft targets, getting the right blade geometry, getting the right edge retention as well as the right edge alignment, and, you know, no, not edge alignment, getting the right edge angles so that you'd be able to have one that could preserve itself and cut through a multitude of different types of targets. We finally ended up with this. So, to quickly go over its stats, the blade length is about 31 inches. In fact, mine, it hits right at around 31 inches. That's 79 centimeters for those of you who are using the metric system, i.e. you're more sane. The overall length, if you don't mind me looking, basically 39.5 inches or 100.5 centimeters. That's the whole sword length. The weight is 1 pound 15 ounces or 900 grams, which I personally find it to be a really good weight for a sword like this. The fittings are steel, something that I really appreciate, and it has a really nice rosewood scabbard. The cord wrap, I think, is a synth leather, and it feels really good in the hand. In fact, this is one of the things that I really enjoy about this particular sword. And another thing is the blade, which is made out of a decent spring steel. I don't know exactly what type of steel it is, but I do know it holds up to cutting targets pretty well. Like the edge was able to, keep its, was able to keep its sharpness. More on that later. And the polish, while not a very nice mirror polish like you happen to see on other swords, it has a kind of like a almost satin looking finish, which I think still looks pretty nice on a utilitarian sword like this. Because this particular sword, it's not made for collecting, it's made for use and practice. It's made for utility. I wouldn't necessarily call it a beater sword per se, but it's definitely a sword that was meant to be used, whether you're just doing it for empty air practice or, actually doing test cutting, which is what this thing was made for. So let's get into the pros of this sword. One, I love the balance and weight of this particular piece. Now, I've held a lot of other swords that have really good balance and weight, but the thing I like about this one is that the weight and the balance is right at that point where the weight is not, it's not forward heavy. The balance is actually really nice. Like if we look right here, if you see where it's balanced right at, see, like right there, right at that sweet spot where you really want a Jian to be at. So this is great for, going through forms practice, drills, all that. It's not overly heavy. You can easily use this in one hand, even though the length of the hand grip is long enough for the occasional two-handed strike, which is actually not atypical for Chinese swords, especially the ones that were used for their intended purpose. But the thing I like about it is that even though it's very nicely balanced, there's still just enough of a substantive weight that if you're training with this, it is going to help you with strength training in your wrists and your forearms, building up the strength in your shoulder and arms. It is great for that. So this is a really good training piece. And because of the quality of its fittings as well as the quality of its construction, if you only owned one sword and it was this one, you could do a whole lot worse than this. This is a piece that could easily be just someone's personal sword, and I don't think you'd be looked down on for it. It's constructed quite well with really good fittings. And again, the mild steel fittings, I honestly think was a really good idea. It's very attractive looking. It holds up well to, shocks, knockdowns, and so on. It just looks pretty. It's very tastefully designed. The fittings, in fact, were made based on Ming pieces, but it also happens to have a suspension that is something that you would tend to see in Qing Dynasty designs, typically for dull as well, but it works really well for this. I think for a contemporary sword, the fittings are very tastefully done, and it has that touch of tradition, but with a little touch of contemporary as well, which just makes it a really good overall piece. Another thing I like about this particular sword is how it's put together. It does use a screw and nut type of construction, so it is not peened. But I'm actually one of those few nuts out there that actually prefers the swords to not be peened, particularly if it's a utilitarian sword. The reason why is because even though a well-peened sword will keep that blade, perfectly, set up, it's not shaking or rattling or anything like that, sooner or later, if you keep using the thing, it's gonna get loose. That's just physics. That's just wear and tear. It's gonna get loose. And the problem with a peened sword is once that blade starts moving around a little bit, once the hand guard starts moving around a little bit, you can't really fix that. Like, you can maybe kind of shim it a little bit, maybe like put little bits of wood or whatever into the hand guard, where the tang of the blade is. But yes, sooner or later, if you want to keep the sword, you're probably going to end up having to rebuild it you know, probably spend a decent amount of money to have a whole new hilt made for it. But with a sword like this, with the kind of nut construction, all you got to do is tighten the nut. Same thing with this, only this was nicely done so that you don't even have that nut sticking out. This one is tightened with a hex wrench. So if you start feeling it getting a little bit loose, which will happen with swords, that's just the nature of the beast, just get a hex wrench, slightly tighten it, you're back in business. And by the way, I use this sword a lot, and I've only had to tighten it once. And that was only because at one time when it, sadly enough, had fallen over and bang, and that caused it to get a little bit loose. Took a little hex wrench, just a slight tighten. Don't over tighten it, or you're actually gonna do more damage. You know, just slight tighten, ready to go. And that was last year. It's still holding up. There's no rattling or anything like that. It's still holding up. Another thing I really want to touch on is the grip itself. I've been handling a lot of swords, you know, well, not lately, but you know, you guys have seen that I've handled several different swords. And one thing I really love about this Jian is just the fact that it is so comfortable to hold. At least for my hands, I have fairly large hands. I mean, I don't got like huge coconut crushing hands or anything like that, but I got pretty big hands. And I've noticed that there's some swords where the grip is kind of small, so getting my hand around it sometimes can be a real pain, especially when you start moving around. It puts extra strain in my palm and in my fingers. This, it's so comfortable. It's just the right freaking thickness, so I can just grip it and it's comfortable and we're good to go. And the wrap that is used also feels really nice in the hand, and you get a really good purchase on it. Even if your hand starts sweating as you're going through your drills, you still tend to have a really good purchase. And in all the time that I've been using this, this has not gotten loose at all. It is very tightly wrapped and wrapped very well. It's using that kind of traditional pattern that you tend to see in a lot of Ming swords and certain Qing swords as well, and it's gorgeous. I love the look of it. Rosewood scabbard also has been holding up over time. It's pretty strong, no cracks, nothing that's happening over the time period. And I've actually seriously been thinking about like putting a little bit of lacquer over this, like, because I've known some people who own this sword and they've actually did a little bit of wood treatment on it, which has given it a nice, rich, darker color. I happen to like the color it already has, but I'm seriously thinking of putting that coat on it just to give it a nice darker look, just to add a little touch of extra class on an already nice looking sword. So with all the positives that I have to say about this, are there any negatives whatsoever? There's one. We have to talk about the elephant in the room here. Before I go on, let me just say that I don't think there's anything wrong with the design itself. Scott Rodell and Paul Champagne, may he rest in peace, did a really good job coming up with this particular sword, and all the design elements, both the utilitarian as well as the aesthetic designs, are great. The problem is the company that they're designing this sword for, Hanwei. Now, I'm not saying that Hanwei is a trash company. I'm not saying that they're a bad company. I'm not even saying that they're a mediocre company. I think Hanwei is overall a decent sword company if you're looking for something to swing around. Your mileage may vary depending on what type of sword you're trying to get, but overall I've seen people who've picked up a katana or a long sword from them. While they'll have a couple of complaints, they won't outright say, oh, their swords are garbage. They'll say, they're pretty decent, whatever. And the same thing can be said about this, but the reason why people in the know tend to be like, Hanwei, you know, like that, is because of something that we all know as the Hanwei lottery. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, let me describe the Hanwei lottery. See, when you get swords from them, you're gonna end up either with a really nice piece that does pretty much what it says on the box, or you're gonna get a well-designed butter knife. Or worse, you might end up with something that completely failed quality control. Thankfully, I haven't been hearing any horror stories recently about people ending up with complete garbage. But the one thing that I've seen other people encounter, and I myself have encountered, is the well-designed butter knife. And this, unfortunately, my personal piece did not escape that fate. Well, not entirely. See, when I was test cutting with this, I noticed that I kept getting inconsistent results, and I wasn't exactly sure why. Like when I first started cutting with it, it seemed to be all right, and then when I tried cutting with it again, the bottles would go flying, and I'm like, or they would be shredded instead of properly cut, and I'm thinking, damn, I must be really rusty today or something. And then I try it with another sword, and perfect every time. I'm like, wait a second, go back to this one, problems, or maybe not as bad a problem. And I didn't understand it until I took a really good look at my sword. And that's when I noticed something. Now, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see this as I rotate it, but let me see if you guys can spot that. This is one side. Yeah, you see that? And then here is the other side. Yeah, can you see that? Yeah. One side is, you're going to notice the reflection pops up a little bit more on the edge than the other. That's because one side is sharp enough to go through a target, not hair cutting sharp, but sharp enough to pretty much go through a target, and the other side is not. That side's kind of dull. It's not so dull that you can easily tell, but it's dull enough that it's not going to be going through anything soft unless you really put some force behind it, and it's definitely not going through any hard targets. So yeah, going through things like bottles, it wasn't happening on that one side, but then when I flipped it over to the other side, then I was getting a little bit more consistent results, though they still weren't all that great. So yeah, needless to say, if you're trying to use it for test cutting, that's a problem. But that's the Hanwei lottery for you. It's not Scott Rodell's fault. I mean, because again, I've seen other people with their versions, and they didn't sharpen it or anything. They just got it right from the box, and it was awesome. I just happened to have, you know, I lost the Hanwei lottery in that one. That being said, because of the type of polish on this and the type of steel, I got no problem just putting this to the sharpening stone. Which, yeah, I haven't done it yet on this because I wanted to talk to you guys about it first. So that means all this time since I've had this sword, it's been sitting here unsharpened, and I haven't been able to properly put it through what it could really do because I haven't sharpened it yet. But I have a set of sharpening stones that's been itching to, you know, go on this thing. So when I finally give it the edge that it deserves, I'll then go back, and hopefully by then I'll be able to figure out my whole test cutting problem and, you know, finding the right space to do it in. But that being said, other than the Hanwei lottery situation, everything else with the sword holds up. Balance is great, weight is great, the quality of its construction has held up in all of this time. I have been using this sword constantly for drills, for forms practice, all of that. This is the sword that I tend to use when Scott has his sword classes on Sundays, and it works great for that. It gets the job done. This is really a good personal sword, training sword. If you want to call it a beater sword, yep. But yeah, and the other thing I like about it is the price. Right now, if you go over to his website, the 7 Stars Trading Company, you can pick this piece up for $319. That's a steal. Like, there are a whole bunch of other swords which cost more than this that I think you could compare this to. Maybe not necessarily the polish, but certainly everything else. And I mean, I know, especially right now with this global economy and how bad the freaking, you know, inflation prices are, the fact that this is still going for around $300, that's amazing. Seriously, it's amazing. So again, if you're looking for a good, properly made Chinese Jian that can withstand the rigors of cutting, which means that it's a real sword and can most likely withstand the rigors of combat, though I really hope you're not in a situation where that's something that you have to consider. You could do far worse than this. This is one of my favorite pieces that I own. It's been a favorite for a long time now, and I'm glad that I'm finally able to give this thing the review it deserves. Well, mostly gave it the review it deserves. You still need to see it in action and, you know, actually cutting through targets, but I can't wait for the day that I do that. But I didn't want to remain silent on this any longer, especially for those of you who were wondering what this piece is like. Now granted, I do still need to do the video where I compare this to two other swords that are very similar to it, to kind of give you my opinion on which one is better or worse, or depending on your needs. That is coming. But I did at least want to talk about this one before I went any further with that. So, hope you found this entertaining. Hope you found this useful. I got a couple of other videos in the works on a variety of different subjects, actually. It's not just going to be about swords and martial arts. I hope you guys will like them. But till then, yeah. I'll catch you guys later. Here comes the train. Yeah, if you're wondering why I don't do many videos lately, I don't know how I'm going to be able to get soundproofing in here.